The Lighthouse Keeper's Daughter. Chapter 1. The Tide That Calls No Name. The lighthouse stood where the world fractured into two opposing truths, land that promised safety, and sea that whispered of infinity. Mira had known both her entire life, though she belonged fully to neither. Her father, Theron, had been keeper of the Cressida Light for 32 years, and she had been his shadow for 20 of them. Every evening, as the sun bled into the western waters, she would climb the 217 iron steps, she had counted them 1,000 times, to light the great beacon. Her hands knew the weight of the oil cans, the resistant turn of the brass mechanisms, the satisfying whoosh as flame met wick and pushed back the encroaching darkness. The people of Cressida Village, huddled in their stone cottages a mile inland, called her father a hero. They called Mira dutiful, which was another way of saying she had surrendered her youth to someone else's calling. She was 26, unmarried, unattached to anyone but the lighthouse itself. The village women whispered that the sea had claimed her, though she had never once set foot on a boat. But they were wrong about one thing. Mira had not surrendered anything. She had chosen this life, though she could not have explained why, even to herself. Something in the rhythm of the tides, the predictable arc of the light sweeping across black waters, gave her a peace she had never found among people. The lighthouse was her monastery, and the beam her prayer, cast out each night to save strangers she would never meet. It was on the night of the autumn equinox, when the boundary between seasons grew thin as fish skin, that everything changed. Mira was descending the spiral stairs after lighting the beacon when she heard it, a sound like no other she had known in 2 decades of oceanic symphony. Not the crash of waves, or the wail of wind, or the lonely cry of gulls. This was a voice, singular and multiple at once, rising from the depths with the resonance of cathedral bells cast into an abyss. She froze, one hand gripping the cold iron railing, and listened. The sound came again. It was singing, though the language was no tongue she recognized. The melody wove through the air like silver thread, each note impossibly pure, and she felt it resonating in her chest, in her bones, as though her very body had become an instrument for its playing. Her father was already at the base of the stairs when she descended, his weathered face drawn with an expression she had never seen before. Something between awe and ancient dread. "You heard it," he said, not a question. "What is it?" Theron moved to the eastern window, the one that faced the vast expanse of open ocean beyond the rocky teeth that guarded the harbor. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, "The singers have returned." Mira joined him at the window. The moon was 3 days from full, bright enough to silver the water and cast shadows across the waves. At first she saw nothing unusual. Then her eye caught movement, shapes breaking the surface, darker than the water, larger than any dolphin or whale she had seen. "What are they?" she whispered. "Depends on who you ask." Her father's voice was distant, as though he were speaking from memory rather than presence. "The old stories call them by many names. The singers, the tide walkers, the ones who remember." He turned to her, and she saw something she had rarely witnessed in his steady gaze: uncertainty. "My grandfather told me they come only when the world is forgetting something essential, something we need to remember before it's too late." "I don't understand." "Neither do I." He placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm. "But I know this. They're calling someone, and I think it's you." The words should have seemed ridiculous, the ravings of a superstitious old man, influenced by too many solitary years beside the sea. But Mira felt their truth in the same place she felt the singing. deep in the core of herself, in a chamber she hadn't known existed. That night she did not sleep. She sat in the watchroom at the lighthouse's crown, tending the light and watching the waters. The singers remained visible until dawn, their forms breaking the surface in patterns that seemed almost like language, almost like dance. And though she could no longer hear their voices over the wind and waves, she felt their presence like a second heartbeat. When the sun rose and her father came to relieve her, she made a decision that surprised even herself. "I need to go to them," she said. Theron's face became stone. "No, you said they were calling me." "I said I thought they were. That doesn't mean you should answer." He moved to the great light, checking its mechanisms with the automatic care of decades. "The singers are not human, Mira. They're something older. Something from the time before we built these walls and lights to keep the darkness away. Whatever they want, it comes with a price." "How do you know?" He was silent for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because my grandfather tried. When he was a young man, he heard their call. He went to them." Theron's hand stilled on the brass. He came back changed. He could barely speak for weeks. When he finally told the story, he said they had shown him the world as it truly was. Not the solid, knowable thing we pretend it is, but something fluid and strange and infinitely connected. He said it was the most beautiful and most terrible thing he'd ever experienced. But he survived. He survived. But he was never entirely here again. Part of him remained always in that other place, that deeper seeing. Her father turned to her, his eyes fierce. "I won't lose you to the same fate." Mira looked out at the water, now golden with morning light. The singers disappeared back into the depths, but their song still echoed in her chest, and she knew with absolute certainty that she had already made her choice. "I'm not asking for permission," she said softly. "I'm telling you what I'm going to do." For 3 days she prepared. She spoke with old Marina, the fishwife who knew more stories than the village library contained, who claimed her great-grandmother had been touched by the sea spirits and could predict storms. Marina's eyes had gone distant when Mira described the singing. "The Tidewalkers," Marina had whispered, making a sign with her fingers that Mira didn't recognize. "They're the memory of the ocean. What the water knows, they carry. What the water forgets, they preserve." She had gripped Mira's wrist with surprising strength. "If they're calling you, girl, it's because something needs to be remembered, something we've let slip away." "What could that be? If I knew, they wouldn't need to call you, would they?" Mira also visited her mother's grave on the hillside overlooking the sea. Ilara had died when Mira was 12, taken by a fever that had swept through the village one bitter winter. Mira barely remembered her face anymore, but she remembered her voice, always singing, always humming, as though melody were her natural language. Standing before the weathered stone, Mira finally understood something she had been too young to grasp at the time. Her mother had heard the singers too. She had never gone to them. She had chosen her family, her daughter, over the call. But she had heard them, and perhaps that unfinished calling had been what the fever found to claim her. "I'm going," Mira told the stone, the earth, the memory. "I don't know why, but I have to." On the 3rd night, she waited until her father was asleep in his cottage beside the lighthouse. She left him a letter, though the words felt inadequate. "Father, I am answering the call. Not because I want to leave you, but because I can't continue pretending I don't hear it. You taught me that the light is a duty, that we keep it burning for strangers who need saving. Perhaps this is the same. Perhaps I'm meant to save something, or remember something, or simply bear witness to something that would otherwise be lost. I love you. I will return. M. She took nothing but a thick wool cloak, a flask of water, and her mother's silver pendant, a simple disc engraved with a spiral that seemed to echo the lighthouse's winding stairs. The beach below the lighthouse was accessible only by a narrow path carved into the cliff face. Mira had walked it 1,000 times in daylight, but never at night. The moon, now full, cast everything in stark silver and shadow. Each step felt like crossing a threshold, leaving behind one version of herself and moving toward another she could not yet see. When she reached the sand, the singing began again. This time it was louder, clearer, and she could almost discern words within the inhuman melody. The language was water and wind, rock and tide, but somehow she understood its meaning, if not its vocabulary. It was singing of depth, of pressure and darkness, and the slow dance of currents that shaped continents, of life that moved in the abyss, unknown and unknowable, of memories older than human language, preserved in the cold, deep places where light never reached. And it was singing her name, not Mira, but something deeper, something that described who she was beneath the designation her parents had given her. It sang of her patience, her vigil, her endless watching from the height. It sang of her loneliness, not with pity, but with recognition. It sang of her mother's unfinished song. She walked into the water. The cold struck her like a fist, stealing her breath. But she forced herself forward, knee-deep, waist-deep. The singing grew louder, and now she could see them. 3 figures rising from the black water ahead. They were not fish and not human, but something between, or perhaps something that contained both and more. Their bodies were sleek and powerful, seal-like but vertical, standing upright in the water. Their faces were almost human, with high cheekbones and large, dark eyes that reflected the moonlight like obsidian mirrors. Their skin was silver gray, smooth as water-worn stone, and when they opened their mouths to sing, she saw rows of small, sharp teeth and throats that glowed with a faint blue-green luminescence. The tallest of the 3 raised a hand, webbed, with long fingers tipped in black claws, and the singing stopped. The silence was absolute. Even the waves seemed to still. When it spoke, its voice was layered, as though a dozen people were speaking in perfect unison. Daughter of the light, you have answered the call. Mira's voice came out hoarse, small against the vastness. What do you want from me? Not from you, the singer said. For you, and through you, for all who have forgotten. Forgotten what? Come deeper, it said, extending its hand. And remember. Mira looked back at the beach, the cliff, the lighthouse with its beam sweeping faithfully across the water. Her father would wake in hours and find her gone. He would be terrified. He might even hate her for this choice. But the singer's song was still resonating in her bones, and she knew that some doors, once seen, could not be unseen. Some calls, once heard, could not be ignored. She took another step forward. The water reached her chest. The cold had become a numbness, her body adjusting to the foreign element. She reached out and took the singer's hand. Its skin was not slimy, as she had feared, but smooth and cool, like polished stone pulled from a river. The fingers closed around hers with surprising gentleness. Breathe deep, the singer said. When we go under, do not struggle. Trust the water. Trust the old knowledge your kind has forgotten, but your body still remembers. Wait, Mira began, but the singer pulled her forward. The water closed over her head. Her lungs screamed immediately, the human panic of drowning overwhelming all reason. She thrashed, tried to surface, but the singer held her firmly. 2 more sets of hands grasped her arms, her shoulders, and she felt herself being pulled down, down into the darkness. This is how I die, she thought with strange clarity, drowned by the things my grandfather warned against, while my father sleeps and the light burns on without me. But then something shifted. The panic receded, not because the fear left, but because something older rose to meet it. Her body stopped fighting. Her lungs, still burning, nevertheless stopped their desperate spasming. And in that moment of surrender, she felt it, the memory the singers had spoken of. Humans had come from the water once. Long ago, in the deep time before memory, they had swum in the ancient seas. They had known the ocean as home, as womb, as the first and final truth. And though they had crawled onto land and built cities and forgotten their origins, that memory remained written in their flesh, in the salt of their blood, in the rhythm of their hearts that echoed the pulse of waves. Mira stopped struggling. She opened her eyes, though salt water stung them. The singers were all around her now, not 3, but dozens, hundreds, their bodies forming a spiral that descended into the depths. Their bioluminescence created a galaxy of blue-green stars in the darkness. They were singing again, and this time she understood. They were singing the history of the world, the story that water told to itself. They were singing of the first rains that shaped the mountains, the glaciers that carved valleys, the rivers that brought life to desert places. They were singing of every tear ever shed, every drop of blood spilled, every bath that cleansed, every drought that killed, every flood that renewed. They were singing the story of connection, how all water is one water, flowing through bodies and clouds and streams and seas in an endless cycle. And they were singing of forgetting, of how humans had learned to see water as a thing apart from themselves, a resource to be controlled rather than akin to be honored, of how they had poisoned the very thing that gave them life, had dammed and diverted and drained without understanding that in doing so, they were severing their own veins. The singers sang of the consequences, oceans that choked on plastic and chemicals, rivers that ran dry, aquifers depleted, glaciers melting, the great cycle breaking down. They sang of a future where the water's memory would be lost entirely, and humans would die of thirst, even as they stood beside poisoned streams, having forgotten how to read the language of their own survival. Mira's lungs were burning again, her vision darkening at the edges. She had been under too long. Human body or not, she could not breathe water. But the singers had one more thing to show her. They parted, and in the space they created, she saw a light. Not the yellow white of her lighthouse beam, but something else. Something that came from the ocean floor itself. It was a spring, pure water rising from deep within the earth, untouched by human hands, perfect and clear as it had been since the world was young. The eldest singer, she somehow knew which one it was now, brought her close to the spring. Its voice resonated directly into her mind. This is what we guard. This is what remains. Every place where water still rises pure, we keep the memory alive. But we cannot do it alone. We need witnesses. We need those who will return to the surface and remember, who will teach the forgetting ones what the water knows. Will you be our witness, daughter of the light? Will you carry the memory back to those who have forgotten? Mira's consciousness was fading, her body demanding air that could not be found. She managed a single thought, clear as the spring before her. Yes, the singer smiled. Or something like a smile shaped its strange, beautiful face. Then it placed one webbed hand over her heart and pushed. Mira shot upward through the dark water, like a stone thrown in reverse. Her body rocketed toward the surface, propelled by a force that had nothing to do with her own muscles. She burst through the boundary between water and air, gasping, choking, alive. Strong hands caught her, human hands, and she was being dragged onto a boat. Someone was wrapping her in blankets, pouring something warm between her lips. Voices surrounded her, frightened and relieved, found her floating. Must have been out here for hours. Miracle, she's alive. Through chattering teeth and blurred vision, Mira recognized the man holding her, her father, his face haggard with terror and relief. "You fool," he whispered, crushing her against his chest. "You beautiful, stupid, brave fool." She tried to speak, to tell him about the singers and the spring and the memory she carried, but her body had other priorities. She was shaking uncontrollably, her core temperature dangerously low, and consciousness was slipping away again. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the lighthouse beam sweeping faithfully across the water, a constant light in an uncertain world. And beneath the waves, hidden from human eyes, the singers dove deep once more, carrying with them their endless song of remembering. Chapter 2. The Keeper of Drowning Truths. Mira woke to white light and the smell of lavender and carbolic soap. Her father's cottage, she realized, though she was in her own small room under the eaves. Through the window, she could see the lighthouse standing sentinel, its beacon dark in the daylight. Her body felt like it had been beaten and left to dry on rocks. Every muscle ached. Her throat was raw. When she tried to sit up, the room tilted dangerously. "Easy." Her father appeared in the doorway with a cup of something steaming. His face was drawn, new lines carved around his eyes. "You've been unconscious for 2 days. 2 days?" Her voice came out as a croak. "Dr. Matheson says it's a miracle you survived. Your core temperature was so low when we pulled you out." His hands shook as he set the cup on the bedside table. "Mira, what in God's name were you thinking?" The memory came flooding back. The singers, the depths, the spring of pure water rising from the earth's heart, the mission they had given her. She tried to find words to explain, but they felt inadequate, like trying to describe color to someone born blind. "I heard them," she said finally. "The singers. They showed me, Father, they showed me what we've forgotten." Theron's expression shifted from relief to something more complex, fear and understanding mixed together. He closed the door and sat heavily on the chair beside her bed. "Tell me," he said quietly. "Tell me everything." So she did. She described the descent, the terror of drowning, the moment when her body remembered its ancient kinship with water. She spoke of the spiral of singing beings, their bioluminescent bodies forming constellations in the dark. She described the spring, the message, the mission she had accepted. When she finished, her father was silent for a long time, staring at his weathered hands. "My grandfather told me something before he died," he said finally. "He said the singers don't just call anyone. They choose those who stand at the boundary, people who live between worlds. He stood at the boundary between sea and land, keeping his fishing boat afloat. You and I, we stand at the boundary between darkness and light, tending the beacon." He looked up at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "He said that when they call you, it means the boundary is weakening. Something essential is being lost, and someone has to cross over to retrieve it." What happened to him after he went to them? He spent the rest of his life mapping springs. Every source of fresh water on this coastline he documented. He would drink from them, test them, and he could tell you, just by taste, whether the water was pure or poisoned, whether the aquifer it came from was healthy or dying. Theron smiled, but it was edged with sadness. People thought he was mad, but he was right about every drought, every well that would run dry, every source that needed protecting. Then why didn't anyone listen? because people prefer comfort to truth. Her father stood and moved to the window, looking out at the lighthouse. They prefer to believe that water will always come from the tap, that the ocean is infinite, that they can dump their waste anywhere and it will simply disappear. Your grandfather tried to tell them otherwise. They called him a prophet of doom and turned away. Mira struggled to sit up, ignoring the protest of her body. Then how am I supposed to do what the singers asked? How can I make people remember if they don't want to? I don't know, Theron admitted, but I know you can't do it from a sickbed. First you recover, then... He paused, his expression conflicted. Then we figure out what comes next, together. The word together settled something in Mira's chest. She had feared he would forbid her from continuing, would lock her in the lighthouse until the singer's call faded from her memory. Instead, he was offering to help, even though it terrified him. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, then left her to rest. But rest proved impossible. Every time Mira closed her eyes, she heard the singers' voices, felt the weight of water above her, saw the pure spring rising from the earth. The memory they had given her was not fading. If anything, it was intensifying. She could feel water now in a way she never had before. The cup on her bedside table sang softly of the rain that had filled it, the pipes that had carried it, the treatment plant that had processed it. She could sense the aquifer beneath the lighthouse, its slow movement through porous stone. She could feel the ocean beyond the walls, its vast presence like a second heartbeat. It was overwhelming and wondrous and terrifying all at once. On the third day she was strong enough to walk. She insisted on climbing the lighthouse stairs, ignoring her father's protests. Each step was an effort, but she needed to reach the light, to stand in the place where she had always found clarity. At the top, she found she wasn't alone. A woman stood by the great lamp, examining it with the careful attention of an expert. She was perhaps 40, with silver-shot black hair bound in a practical braid, and skin weathered by sun and salt. She wore the clothes of someone who spent time on boats: canvas pants, a wool sweater, sturdy boots, and there was an air of competence about her that reminded Mira of her father. "You're awake," the woman said without turning. "Good. I was beginning to worry I'd traveled all this way for nothing." "Who are you?" "Dr. Isla Corwen, marine biologist, though that's a modern term for what I really am." She finally turned, and Mira saw eyes that were a startling gray-green, like the sea itself. "I study what the ocean remembers, and I've been waiting 20 years for the singers to call someone again." Mira gripped the railing for support. "You know about them?" "Know about them? I've devoted my career to them." Isla crossed to where Mira stood, studying her face with frank curiosity. The last person they called was a fisherman in Nova Scotia in 2005. Before that, a pearl diver in Japan in 1998. There's a pattern. They call someone every few years, always someone who lives at the boundary between land and sea. And they always give the same message: remember what you're losing before it's too late. How do you know all this? Because I've interviewed every person they've called in the last 3 decades that I could find. Most people think I'm chasing folklore, a mythology that has no basis in science. Isla smiled grimly. But I've seen too much, measured too much, documented too much to dismiss it. The singers are real, and they're trying to warn us. Warn us about what? About the collapse of the hydrological cycle, about the poisoning of the watershed, about the death of the ocean. Isla moved to the window, gesturing out at the vast expanse of blue. The water cycle is the Earth's circulatory system. Rivers are arteries, aquifers are organs, the ocean is the heart. And we've been systematically destroying it, damming the arteries, draining the organs, poisoning the heart. The singers are the Earth's immune system, trying to signal that something is desperately wrong. Mira joined her at the window. That's what they showed me, the spring rising from the deep. They said there are places where the memory is still pure, where water still knows itself. Sacred springs, Isla said, nodding. Every culture has stories about them. Healing waters, eternal fountains, springs that grant wisdom or life. We've dismissed them as superstition, but they're real. They're aquifer sources that haven't been contaminated. Natural springs that still flow with water that remembers what water was before humans learned to poison it. The singers want me to protect them, but I don't even know where they are. No, Isla said softly, but you can learn. That's what happens to everyone they call. They develop a sense for water, an ability to read it, taste it, understand its history and health, just by being near it. She turned to Mira with sudden intensity. Your grandfather had it. That's why your father called me. He remembered stories about the old man who could find springs and predict droughts. When he described what happened to you, he knew I would want to meet you. My father called you? 2 days ago, while you were unconscious. He's terrified of what's happening to you, but he's also smart enough to know you'll need guidance. Isla pulled a worn notebook from her jacket pocket. I've been mapping the sacred springs for 15 years. I have records of 47 that still flow clean, but there are more, hundreds, maybe thousands, that I haven't found yet. With your new sense, we could locate them, document them, protect them before it's too late. Mira's head was spinning. You want me to help you find springs? I want you to help me preserve the memory before it's lost entirely. Isla's eyes burned with fierce purpose. The singers chose you for a reason, Mira. You've spent your life tending a light that keeps ships from crashing on the rocks. Now they're asking you to tend a different kind of light, the knowledge of where pure water still exists, so that when the poison sources finally fail, humanity will know where to find salvation. It was too much, too large. Mira was just a lighthouse keeper's daughter, a woman who had never been more than 10 miles from her birthplace. How could she possibly do what Isla was describing? But even as doubt filled her mind, her body was responding. She could feel the springs even now, distant pinpricks of clarity in a confused network of pipes and pollution. One was close, very close, perhaps a mile inland. She could sense its purity like a bell ringing in fog. There's one near here, she said, surprised by the certainty in her voice. Up the coast, inland, in the hills. Isla's eyes widened. You can feel it already? I can feel all of it. The water everywhere. Mira looked down at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. It's like I've been deaf my whole life, and suddenly I can hear music playing all around me. Only some of the music is beautiful, and some of it is... She struggled for words. Discordant. Wrong. Sick. The poisoned water, Isla said gently. You're sensing what humans have done to it. Mira felt tears burning her eyes. How do people not feel this? How can they pour chemicals into rivers and not know they're hurting something alive? Because they've forgotten that water is alive, that it has memory, history, consciousness of a kind we barely understand. Isla placed a hand on Mira's shoulder. That's why the singers called you. Not to fix everything, that would be impossible, but to remember, to witness, to preserve the knowledge of the few places where water still sings true. For a long moment, Mira stood silent, feeling the weight of the mission settling onto her shoulders. It was terrifying. It was impossible. It was also necessary. When do we start? She asked. Isla smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Right now, the spring you sensed. Can you guide me to it? I think so. Then let's go, before you lose the connection. They descended the lighthouse stairs together, Isla moving with the confidence of someone who had climbed 1,000 such structures. Mira still weak, but driven by something stronger than her physical limitations. Her father was waiting at the bottom, his expression conflicted. "You're leaving," he said. Not a question. "Just for the day," Mira promised. "We're going to find a spring. I'll be back before dark." Theron looked between his daughter and the scientist, then nodded slowly. "Take the old survey map in my desk, the one my grandfather made. It might help." Mira embraced him. "Thank you for understanding." "I don't understand," he admitted. "But I trust you. Just be careful. The path the singers set you on, it's not an easy one." "I know." They left the lighthouse behind, climbing the narrow path that wound up the coastal cliffs. Mira had walked it 1,000 times, but never with this new sense guiding her. She could feel the spring calling like a lodestone, pulling her forward. Isla kept pace beside her, occasionally asking questions. "Can you sense how deep it is? How fast it's flowing? What the source might be?" And Mira found she could answer them all, the knowledge simply appearing in her mind, as if she had always known it. They walked for an hour, passing through pine forest that smelled of resin and earth. Mira's body protested every step, still recovering, but she pushed forward. The spring was close now, very close. They emerged into a clearing, and there it was, a small pool, perhaps 10 feet across, fed by water bubbling up from between moss-covered rocks. The water was absolutely clear, reflecting the sky like liquid glass. Around it, the grass was a brighter green than anywhere else in the forest, and the air itself seemed fresher, more alive. Isla knelt beside the pool, pulling instruments from her pack, thermometers, pH meters, sample bottles. But Mira didn't need instruments. She could feel the spring's story simply by being near it. This water had fallen as snow on the mountains 300 years ago. It had filtered down through layers of granite and limestone, purified by the slow patience of stone. It had traveled in darkness, following paths carved by time itself, until it found this place where the pressure and the stone's permeability aligned to let it surface once more. It had never touched human contamination. It was as pure as water could be in a modern world, a living memory of what all water had once been. "It's perfect," Isla breathed, staring at her instruments. pH 7.4, no nitrates, no pesticides, no industrial chemicals. The mineral content suggests a deep aquifer, isolated from surface contamination. She looked up at Mira with tears in her eyes. "Do you know how rare this is? In my entire career, I've only found a handful of springs this pure." Mira knelt beside the pool and carefully cupped some water in her hands. It was cold, almost shockingly so, and it seemed to sing against her skin. She lifted it to her lips and drank. The taste was indescribable. It was water, just water, but it carried within it the memory of snow and stone, of darkness and patience, of the earth's slow dreaming. It was the taste of the world before humans learned to poison it. And something else happened. The singers' voices, which had been a constant hum in the back of her mind since the drowning, suddenly harmonized with the water. She could hear them more clearly now, and she understood that this was how they communicated across distance, through the water itself, through the great interconnected network of aquifers and rivers and oceans that wrapped the planet. The message was simple: more. There are more. Find them. Remember them before they are lost. "Mira," Isla's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right?" Mira blinked, returning fully to the clearing, the sunlight, the present moment. "I'm fine. I I heard them again, the singers. They're telling me there are more springs, many more. Can you sense where? Mira closed her eyes and reached out with this new awareness. It was like spreading a net across the landscape, feeling for those points of purity in a world of pollution. And they were there, distant but distinct, each one a bell ringing in the fog. North, she said, opening her eyes. There's a cluster of them 3 days' journey north in the highlands, and west along the old forest roads, and... She turned, surprised. There's one beneath Cressida village itself, deep, but there, right under the old church. Isla was already pulling out maps, marking locations. This is incredible. With your sense, we could map every remaining pure spring on this continent, create a database, protect them legally, establish them as heritage sites. No. The word came out sharper than Mira intended. I'm sorry, but no. If we make them public, they'll become targets, places people will flock to, contaminate, commercialize. The singers didn't call me to put these springs on display. They called me to protect them. Isla was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. You're right. I was thinking like a scientist, not like a guardian. So what do you propose? We document them, yes, but we keep the information private. We form a network. People who know where the springs are, who can monitor them, protect them quietly. We teach others how to read water the way I'm learning to, so the knowledge doesn't die with us. Mira looked down at the pool, its surface rippling gently in the breeze. The singers have been doing this for centuries, I think, calling people to be witnesses. We need to find the others they've called, connect them, build something that will last beyond our lifetimes. Isla studied her with newfound respect. The fisherman's daughter becomes the architect. I like it. She stood, brushing moss from her knees. I have contacts, other researchers, conservationists, people who've spent their lives trying to protect water sources. We can reach out to them carefully, feel out who can be trusted. And we need to find the others the singers have called, Mira added. You said there was a fisherman in Nova Scotia? Marcus Chen. He runs a small fishing operation out of Halifax now. When the singers called him, he tried to warn people about the collapse of cod populations, the acidification of the ocean. Like your grandfather, people thought he was mad. Isla packed her instruments carefully. But he's still there, still watching the water, still trying to warn anyone who will listen. We should visit him. We will. But first, Isla gestured back toward the village. First, you need to finish recovering, and we need to prepare. This isn't a journey you undertake lightly. Once you start walking this path, once you fully accept the role the singers have given you, there's no going back to your ordinary life. Mira looked one last time at the spring, committing every detail to memory. The way the light played on the water, the specific green of the moss, the quality of silence that surrounded it, as though the forest itself was holding its breath in reverence. I don't want to go back, she said quietly. I've been tending a light to help ships find their way safely. Now I understand there's a different kind of navigation that's needed, helping people find their way back to what they've forgotten, back to the truth that we're not separate from water. We are water, and if we poison it, we poison ourselves. Isla smiled. The singers chose well. They walked back to the lighthouse together as afternoon slid into evening. Mira felt different, still weak in body, but stronger in purpose. The world looked changed to her now. Every stream they crossed, every puddle in the path, every cloud overhead spoke to her in the language she was learning to understand. Her father was waiting at the lighthouse, the great lamp already lit behind him, its beam beginning its nightly sweep across the darkening waters. You found it, he said, seeing the expression on her face. I found it, and there are more, Father. So many more. Theron looked at Isla, then back at his daughter. You're leaving, aren't you? Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. This place won't be enough for what you need to do. Mira felt her throat tighten. I'll come back, as often as I can, I know, but it won't be the same. He wasn't angry, just sad, acknowledging a truth they both felt. You've crossed a threshold. You're becoming something else, something more than just a lighthouse keeper's daughter. I'll always be that, Mira insisted. You'll always have been that, he corrected gently. But you're becoming a different kind of keeper now, tending a different kind of light. He pulled her into an embrace. I'm proud of you, and terrified for you, but mostly proud. They held each other as the beam swept overhead, that familiar rhythm that had marked every night of Mira's life. But even in her father's arms, she could feel the pull of the mission, the springs calling to her, the singer's song resonating through the water in her own body, the vast network of guardians and witnesses she would need to build. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed under the eaves, Mira heard the singing again. But this time, it wasn't just the singers. It was the springs themselves, each one a note in a great symphony. And beneath it all, the deep bass drone of the ocean, that vast heart that connected everything. She fell asleep to that music and dreamed of water, of rain becoming rivers, rivers becoming oceans, oceans becoming clouds, clouds becoming rain again in an endless cycle. And in the dream, she saw all the places where that cycle was breaking, where poison entered the flow, where dams stopped the current, where aquifers ran dry. But she also saw the places of purity that remained, springs hidden in forests, aquifers deep beneath deserts, glacial streams in high mountains, each one a seed of memory, waiting for someone to find it and protect it. She woke before dawn with absolute certainty. She would find them all, or die trying. The next weeks passed in a strange blur of recovery and preparation. Mira's body slowly healed, but her connection to water only grew stronger. She could no longer drink from the village tap without tasting the chlorine, the lead from old pipes, the trace pharmaceuticals that filtered through from waste treatment. She could feel the ocean's moods, its anger during storms, its grief over warming temperatures, its patience that nevertheless was wearing thin. Isla stayed at the lighthouse, working with Mira each day to refine her new sense. They practiced together. Isla would hide water samples around the property, some pure and some contaminated, and Mira would locate them and identify their source. Her accuracy was astounding, even to Isla, who had studied water for decades. You're not just sensing chemical composition, Isla marveled, after one particularly successful session. You're reading the water's history, where it's been, what it's touched, how long it's been isolated from the surface. It's like, she searched for words, like you're reading a book written in a language no one else can see. It's more like listening, Mira corrected. The water tells its own story. I'm just learning to hear it. They also began reaching out to others. Isla made careful contact with Marcus Chen in Nova Scotia, and after several long phone conversations, he agreed to meet with them. There was also a woman in Scotland, an artist named Brighid, who had been called by the singers in 2010 and had spent the last 15 years painting nothing but water, springs, rivers, oceans, claiming she was trying to capture what she called the soul of water before it was lost. We're building something, Isla said one evening as they sat in the lighthouse watching room, the beam rotating overhead. A network of witnesses, people who carry the memory of what water is supposed to be. The singers have been doing this for a long time, Mira said, calling people, giving them the memory, hoping they'll preserve it. But has it worked? Are we any closer to remembering? Isla was quiet for a moment. The world is still poisoning its water. Glaciers are still melting. Aquifers are still being drained. So in that sense, no, it hasn't worked. She turned to Mira. But that doesn't mean it won't. Sometimes the seed is planted long before it grows. Your grandfather mapped springs 60 years ago. Those maps are helping us now. Brighid's paintings are awakening something in people who see them, a longing for water that's clean and true. Marcus's warnings about the ocean, they're finally being heard by younger scientists who are proving he was right all along. So we're playing a long game. We're preserving hope, Isla said. That's what the singers are really asking us to do, to hold on to the memory of what's possible, even when everything seems lost. So that when humanity finally wakes up, if we wake up, there will still be places where pure water exists, still be people who remember how to find it. On the first day of winter, 6 weeks after her drowning, Mira declared herself ready to travel. Her father accepted it with the resigned grace of someone who had known this moment was inevitable. He pressed a leather journal into her hands, his grandfather's, filled with meticulous notes about springs and aquifers and the language of water. He would have wanted you to have this, Theron said. Use it well. Mira and Isla departed Cressida village in Isla's old truck, heading north toward the highlands where Mira had sensed a cluster of springs. As they drove, Mira watched the landscape roll past, and everywhere she looked, she could feel the water beneath the surface. The streams and aquifers, the healthy and the dying, the remembered and the forgotten. 3 days later, they reached the highlands, a wild country of granite peaks and glacial valleys where human presence was sparse. Mira led them off-road, following paths that existed only in her new sense, until they reached a place where 5 springs emerged from the earth within a square mile of each other. It was sacred ground, though no church had ever been built there. The springs fed into a pristine alpine lake that reflected the sky like polished silver. The water was so clear you could see every pebble on the bottom, every fish swimming in the depths. This is it, Mira breathed. This is what the world was like before we forgot. They spent a week there, documenting everything. Isla took her measurements and samples while Mira sat by the springs and listened to their stories. Each one was different. This one had traveled through marble, that one through granite, another through volcanic stone. Each carried a unique mineral signature, a unique voice, and each night the singers came to her in dreams, showing her more. They showed her the great underground rivers that flowed beneath continents, the aquifers that took 1,000 years to fill and could be drained in decades. They showed her the places where water tables were falling, where once flowing springs had gone dry, where ancient wells stood empty. But they also showed her the places that endured, the deep reserves that humans hadn't yet found, the protected watersheds, the springs in places so remote that no road could reach them. These were the treasures she needed to find and guard. On their last night in the highlands, Mira walked alone to the largest of the springs. The moon was new, the stars brilliant overhead. She knelt beside the water and spoke aloud, though she wasn't sure if anyone, anything, was listening. I understand now what you're asking of me, but I don't know if I'm strong enough. I'm just one person. The world is so large and the poisoning is so widespread. How can I possibly make a difference? The answer came not in words, but in a vision. She saw a single spring in a vast desert, its water creating an oasis where nothing else could survive. She saw how that one spring sustained hundreds of species, plants, animals, humans, all dependent on that single source of purity. Then she saw herself and the others like her, Isla, Marcus, Brighid, and more she hadn't yet met. each one tending a different spring, protecting a different source. Individually, they seemed insignificant, but together they formed a network of hope, a constellation of preservation. One spring couldn't save a desert, but it could save what was around it. And if enough springs were protected, if enough sources of memory were preserved, then perhaps, humanity might have something to return to when the poisoning finally stopped. If it stopped, Mira returned to the truck as dawn was breaking, her face set with determination. Isla looked up from her maps and saw something had changed. What happened? I'm ready, Mira said simply. Ready to meet the others, ready to build the network, ready to do whatever it takes. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. Mira climbed into the truck. Let's go to Nova Scotia. I want to meet Marcus Chen. As they drove away from the highlands, Mira looked back one last time at the sacred springs, their waters glinting in the early morning light. She had found them, she had witnessed them, and now she would protect them, no matter what it cost. The singers had called her for this purpose, and she would not fail them. Chapter 3. The Drowning of Hope. Nova Scotia welcomed them with cold rain and gray skies that merged seamlessly with the gray Atlantic. Marcus Chen's fishing operation was located in a weathered harbor town where the buildings seemed to lean into the wind like old men bracing against a storm they could feel in their bones. They found Marcus on his boat, a 30-foot trawler called the Last Memory, mending nets with the patient, repetitive movements of someone who had performed this task 10,000 times. He was in his 50s, with weathered skin the color of teak, and eyes that held the particular sadness of someone who had seen too much truth and been believed too little. Dr. Corwen, he said, looking up as they approached. I was wondering when you'd come. His gaze shifted to Mira. And you must be the new one. I can see it in your eyes, that look of someone who's been shown what lies beneath. Mira, she said, extending her hand. He took it, and the moment they touched, she felt it, the connection through water. His body was mostly water, as all bodies were, but his had been changed by the singers just as hers had. There was a resonance between them, like two tuning forks vibrating at the same frequency. You feel it too, Marcus said, not a question. The others always do. How many of us are there? That I know of? Maybe 20 worldwide. But Isla thinks there are more. People the singers called who never connected with the rest of us, who maybe thought they were going mad and tried to forget what they'd learned. He gestured toward the boat. Come aboard. We should talk properly. The cabin was cramped but meticulously organized. Every rope coiled exactly, every tool in its place. The walls were covered with charts, not just navigational maps, but also hand-drawn diagrams showing ocean currents, temperature changes, pH levels across different regions. This is what I've been tracking, Marcus said, tapping one of the charts. The Atlantic meridional overturning circulation. It's weakening. The singers showed me this 20 years ago. They showed me how the ocean breathes, how currents carry heat and nutrients and oxygen around the planet. And they showed me what would happen if that breathing stopped. Mira leaned closer, studying the chart. Even without Marcus's explanation, she could feel the truth of it. The ocean was struggling, its great cycling movements disrupted by warming temperatures and melting ice. When I first tried to warn people, Marcus continued, his voice bitter, they told me I was being alarmist, a fisherman with no formal education, predicting climate catastrophe. They dismissed me completely. He poured 3 cups of coffee from a battered thermos. Now, 20 years later, scientists are saying exactly what I said, but we've lost 2 decades we could have used to prepare. Why didn't they listen? Mira asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Because people don't want to hear bad news. They especially don't want to hear it from someone who learned it from singing creatures in the ocean rather than from university computers and peer-reviewed papers. Marcus sipped his coffee. The singers gave me a gift, the ability to read the ocean like a book. But that gift came with a curse, knowing what's coming and being powerless to stop it. The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. Isla reached across the small table and gripped his hand. "You're not powerless," she said firmly. "You've been documenting everything. When the historians look back, trying to understand how we missed the warning signs, your charts will show that we didn't miss them. We ignored them. That's important." "Is it?" Marcus pulled his hand away. "Is it important to document our own stupidity for future generations who might not even exist?" The cabin fell silent except for the sound of rain on the deck above and the gentle rocking of the boat. Mira felt the despair radiating from Marcus like cold fog, and she understood. This was the danger Isla had warned her about. The risk that came with knowing too much truth and being unable to share it effectively. It could break you. "The singers haven't given up," Mira said quietly. "They're still calling people. They called me 2 months ago. If they thought it was hopeless, they would have stopped." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then something in his expression softened slightly. "You're still new to this, still optimistic. That's good. Hold on to that as long as you can." "I don't think optimism is the right word," Mira said. "I'm not optimistic that humanity will suddenly wake up and fix everything. But I'm committed to preserving what can be preserved, protecting what can be protected, and keeping the memory alive for whoever comes after." "And you think that's enough?" "I think it has to be enough, because it's all we can do." Marcus was quiet again, then nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I've been so focused on what we're losing that I've forgotten to protect what remains." He stood and moved to a cabinet, pulling out a worn folder. "I've been mapping the North Atlantic's remaining healthy zones, areas where the ecosystem is still relatively intact, where cold water still wells up from the deep, bringing nutrients. There aren't many left, but they exist." He spread the maps across the table. Mira leaned over them, and immediately she could feel the truth of what he'd documented. These were the ocean's springs, places where life still thrived as it should, where the water still sang its ancient song. "These need protection," she said. "International waters," Marcus replied. "No government wants to restrict access. Too many competing interests. Fishing rights, mineral extraction, shipping lanes. I've tried working with conservationists, but it's like trying to hold back the tide with your bare hands." "Then we need a different approach," Isla said. She had been quiet until now, but there was a calculating look in her eyes that Mira was learning to recognize. "Legal protection isn't working, but what if we created an informal network? Fishermen, sailors, researchers, anyone who uses these waters regularly. We share information about where the healthy zones are, and we all agree to avoid overtaxing them. Nothing official, nothing that requires government approval. Just people who care, choosing to act responsibly." "A fishers' guild," Marcus said slowly. "Like the old days, before corporations took over the industry." "Exactly. The singers gave you knowledge about where the ocean is still healthy. Use that knowledge to organize the people who depend on the ocean. Build a network of guardians." Isla looked at Mira. "The same way we're building a network for springs?" For the first time since they'd arrived, Marcus smiled. A small thing, but genuine. "You know, that might actually work. There are still plenty of independent operators like me, people who've been fishing these waters for generations. They've seen the changes. They know something's wrong. They just don't know what to do about it." "Then teach them," Mira said. Teach them to read the water the way you do. Maybe they won't have your gift, but they can learn to recognize the signs of a healthy ecosystem versus a dying one. They spent the next 3 days with Marcus, learning from him as he had learned from the singers. He took them out on the boat, showing them how to read the surface of the ocean, the color and texture of the water, the behavior of birds, the presence or absence of certain fish species. All of it told a story about what was happening below, and Mira found her spring sense translating to the ocean. She could feel the great upwellings of cold water from the deep, the warm currents flowing from the south, the places where pollution had created dead zones where nothing could live. The ocean was vast beyond comprehension, but it followed the same principles as the springs: memory held in water, history written in current and temperature and chemistry. On their last night, Marcus took them to a place he called his cathedral, a spot 5 miles offshore where 3 currents converged, creating an upwelling that brought nutrients from the deep. The water there was alive with fish, with diving birds, with seals, and the occasional whale passing through. "This is what it used to be like everywhere," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "The whole ocean used to be this abundant, and it could be again if we just stopped poisoning it, stopped overfishing it, stopped treating it like an infinite resource." Mira sat at the boat's railing, trailing her hand in the cold water, and she could feel it, the ocean's memory of abundance, of waters so thick with life that you could walk across the backs of fish. It was a memory from before humans learned industrial fishing, before they learned to dump chemicals and plastic and heat into the sea. The memory was fading, but it wasn't gone. Not yet. "We'll protect this place," she said to Marcus, "and all the other places like it. We'll build the network. We'll teach people to be guardians instead of exploiters." "You sound very certain." "I am certain, because the alternative, giving up, accepting that it's too late, that's not actually an option. If we give up, then it definitely ends. If we keep fighting, keep preserving, keep remembering, then there's at least a chance." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded. "The singers chose well with you. You have something I lost somewhere along the way: determination without naivety. You see the truth, but it hasn't broken you yet." "Yet," Mira echoed. "But I have help. I have Isla. I have you. I'll have the others we find. None of us can do this alone." They returned to harbor as dawn was breaking, the sky lightening from black to gray to a pale gold that made the water shimmer like hammered metal. Marcus helped them unload their gear, then pulled Mira aside. "There's something you need to know," he said quietly. "Not everyone the singers call survives the mission. Some of them, they see too much truth, feel too much grief, and they can't bear it. There was a woman in Ireland, called about 10 years ago. She walked into the ocean one night and didn't come back. They found her body 3 days later." Mira felt ice crystallize in her stomach. "You think she was overcome?" "I think she drowned in despair," Marcus said bluntly. "The singers show us what's being lost, but they don't protect us from the emotional weight of that knowledge. You need to be careful. You need to find ways to carry the grief without letting it crush you." "How do you do it?" "Some days better than others." Marcus looked out at the water. "I focus on the small victories. Every fisherman I convince to avoid the spawning grounds. Every healthy zone I document. Every day the ocean keeps breathing. It's not enough to save everything, but it's something. And something is better than nothing." They left Nova Scotia with a commitment from Marcus to begin organizing the Maritime Guardians, and with a deeper understanding of the cost of their calling. The drive back south was quiet, both women lost in their own thoughts. It was Isla who finally broke the silence, somewhere in Maine as evening fell. "Marcus is right about the danger. I've been tracking the people the singers have called, and the statistics aren't good. About 30% of them experience severe depression. About 10%, she paused. About 10% don't survive. Suicide, mostly. Or accidents that might not have been accidents. Mira's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Why didn't you tell me this before? Would it have changed your decision to answer the call? Mira thought about it honestly. No, that's why I didn't tell you. You needed to choose this freely, not out of ignorance, but out of authentic commitment. Isla turned to look at her. But now you need to know what you're facing. This isn't just about finding springs and protecting them. It's about carrying knowledge that can break your heart. Every poisoned river, every drained aquifer, every dead zone in the ocean, you'll feel it personally, and you need to develop strategies for handling that grief without letting it destroy you. What strategies? Different things work for different people. Brighid paints. She says it helps her process what she's seen. Marcus focuses on small, concrete actions. Your grandfather documented everything meticulously, turning his knowledge into data that felt manageable. Isla was quiet for a moment. I write. Scientific papers, yes, but also poetry. Letters I never send to politicians who won't listen. Sometimes I just need to put the grief into words, so it's not all churning around inside me. What if none of that works? Then you find other people who understand. You talk to them. You share the burden. That's another reason why building the network is so important. Not just for practical coordination, but for emotional survival. No one should have to carry this knowledge alone. They drove on through the darkness, and Mira felt the weight of what she'd taken on settling more heavily on her shoulders. She had been so focused on the mission, find the springs, protect them, build the network, that she hadn't fully considered the personal cost. But even knowing the dangers, knowing that some who walked this path didn't survive it, she knew she wouldn't turn back. The singers had shown her a truth that couldn't be unseen. The springs had sung her a song that couldn't be unheard. She was committed now, for better or worse. They stopped for the night at a small motel near the border, too tired to drive further. Mira lay in bed, listening to the sound of trucks on the nearby highway, and found herself thinking about the woman in Ireland who had walked into the ocean and not come back. Had she failed, or had the weight simply become too much? Had she lost hope, or had hope never been the point? Mira didn't have answers, but she made herself a promise. She would find ways to carry the grief without drowning in it. She would celebrate the small victories, document the surviving springs, focus on preservation rather than loss, and she would stay connected to the network, to people like Isla and Marcus and Brighid, who understood what it meant to be a guardian of vanishing things. Sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of water, but this time they were nightmares. Springs running dry, rivers turning to sludge, the ocean choking on plastic and heat. She woke gasping, her heart racing, sweat soaking her sheets despite the cool room. This was the curse Marcus had spoken of. Knowing what was being lost, feeling it in your body, being powerless to stop it all. But as dawn light crept through the motel curtains, Mira forced herself out of bed. She splashed water on her face, tap water, chemical treated, but still precious, and looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were different than they had been 2 months ago. Deeper, sadder, but also more determined. You're not drowning, she told her reflection. You're learning to swim in deep waters. There's a difference. Isla was already up, working on her laptop in the motel's tiny breakfast area. She looked up as Mira approached and immediately read the exhaustion in her face. Bad dreams? Very. It gets easier to manage. Not easier to bear, but easier to manage. Isla poured Mira a cup of coffee from the complimentary pot. Today we're going to do something different. No springs, no catastrophe documentation. Today we're going to visit something beautiful. What? You'll see. They drove north into New Hampshire, into mountains that were dressed in the last colors of autumn. Isla navigated by memory, turning onto progressively smaller roads until they were on a dirt track that wound up through forest. Finally, they stopped at what appeared to be nothing special, just trees and undergrowth and the sound of water somewhere nearby. "Come on," Isla said, grabbing a day pack from the back seat. They hiked for 20 minutes, following the faint trail that Isla seemed to know by heart. Then they emerged into a small valley, and Mira gasped. A waterfall tumbled down a cliff face, perhaps 40 feet high, falling into a perfect pool surrounded by moss-covered rocks and autumn-bright trees. The water was crystal clear, and where the sun hit it, rainbows danced in the spray. "This is Selkie Falls," Isla said. "One of the first springs I ever documented. It's not the purest. There's some agricultural runoff that reaches it in heavy rains. But it's still beautiful, still mostly clean, still worth protecting." They sat on the rocks beside the pool, and Mira let the sound of falling water wash over her. She reached out with her water sense and found that Isla was right. The water here wasn't perfect, but it was good. It remembered wildness. It still sang, even if the song was slightly muted. "Why did you bring me here?" Mira asked. "Because you need to remember why we do this. It's easy to get caught up in the catastrophe, the loss, the seemingly impossible magnitude of the problem. But we don't do this out of despair. We do it because places like this still exist, because they're worth fighting for, because beauty and purity haven't completely vanished from the world. They're just rare and endangered, like any precious thing." Isla pulled off her boots and waded into the pool, gasping at the cold. "Come on. When's the last time you just played in water instead of analyzing it?" Mira hesitated, then followed. The water was shockingly cold, fed by underground springs that never knew the warmth of sun. But it was also exhilarating, alive, clean enough to drink straight from the falls. They splashed like children, laughing, letting the waterfall's spray soak them. And for a few minutes, Mira forgot about poisoned aquifers and dying oceans and the weight of knowledge that could crush you. She just felt the water, cold and pure and joyful in its own existence. This too was part of being a guardian, not just mourning what was lost, but celebrating what remained. Not just documenting the catastrophe, but preserving the memory of beauty. When they finally climbed out, shivering and exhilarated, Isla pulled a thermos of hot chocolate from her pack. She had planned this, Mira realized. She had known Mira would need this moment. "Thank you," Mira said, cupping the warm mug in her cold hands. "We'll do this regularly," Isla promised. "Between the hard work, between the grief, we'll find places like this and just be present with them. That's how you survive this calling. You balance the weight of knowledge with the lightness of joy." They stayed at Selkie Falls until evening, and when they finally hiked back to the truck, Mira felt different. Still aware of all that was being lost, but also aware of all that could still be saved. Still grieving, but not drowning. It was a fragile balance, she knew. One that would require constant attention, constant recalibration. But it was possible. The proof sat beside her. Isla, who had been walking this path for 15 years and was still here, still fighting, still capable of joy. "Where next?" Mira asked as they pulled onto the highway. "Scotland," Isla said, "to meet Brighid. She wants to paint you, all the water guardians. She's creating what she calls a visual record of those who remember. And after that, we keep building the network. We find more springs, meet more guardians, document more of what needs to be preserved. We do the work, we carry the weight, and we survive." Isla glanced at her, smiling. "Together." Mira nodded, feeling the truth of it. She wasn't drowning. She was learning to swim in deep, dark waters, and she wasn't alone. The singers had called her not to a solo mission, but to a community. A network of witnesses and guardians, each one carrying a piece of the memory, none of them having to carry it all alone. It was enough. It had to be enough. And for now, driving through the autumn darkness with a friend beside her, and the knowledge of beautiful places still existing in the world, it felt like it might actually be enough. The Lighthouse Keeper's Daughter, Chapter 4. The Language of Stone and Water. The flight to Scotland felt like crossing between worlds, leaving behind the familiar Atlantic coast for something older, steeped in legends that predated the very concept of the New World. Mira pressed her face to the window as they descended, watching the patchwork of green fields and grey stone give way to the highlands, where mountains rose like ancient giants still sleeping. Brighid met them at the airport in Inverness, driving a battered Land Rover that had clearly seen decades of rough highland roads. She was younger than Mira had expected, perhaps 35, with wild red hair barely constrained by a colorful scarf and paint permanently staining her hands in shades of blue and green. "You're the lighthouse keeper's daughter," she said, embracing Mira like an old friend, despite having just met. Her accent was thick, musical. "I've been dreaming about you for weeks. The singers told me you were coming. They speak to you in dreams." "They speak to me in everything. Dreams, paintings, the rain on my windows. Once you've been called, they never truly leave you." Brighid tossed their bags into the back of the Land Rover with careless strength. "Come on, I've got everything set up at the studio." They drove north into wilder country, where the roads narrowed to single lanes and sheep grazed on impossibly green hillsides. Brighid kept up a constant stream of conversation, about her art, about the spring she'd found, about the other guardians she'd met over the years. "There's a pattern to who they call," she said as they wound up a particularly precarious mountain road. "We're all boundary people. You and your Da keeping light against darkness. Marcus riding the line between air and water on his boat. Me," she laughed. "I was always caught between what I saw and what I could express, between the world as it appears and the world as it truly is. Artists live on boundaries, and the singers, they call to those of us who already know how to exist in liminal spaces. Have you met many of us? 15 over the years, though 3 of them are gone now." Brighid's voice softened. "Couldn't carry the weight. One was the woman in Ireland that Marcus told you about. She was a friend, beautiful soul. The grief ate her alive." They fell into silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Mira was learning that silence among the water guardians was different from silence among ordinary people. It was loaded with shared understanding, with the weight of knowledge that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Brighid's studio was a converted stone barn on the edge of a loch, surrounded by heather and gorse. The moment Mira stepped inside, she gasped. Every wall was covered with paintings, hundreds of them in all sizes, and every single one was of water, springs bubbling from moss-covered rocks, rivers raging through gorges, the ocean in all its moods, calm and furious, clear and murky, alive and dying. But what struck Mira most was that these weren't just paintings of water. They were portraits of water's soul. "You can see it," Brighid said, watching her face. "Most people look at these and see pretty pictures, but you see what I'm actually painting." "You're painting memory," Mira whispered. "The water's memory." "Exactly." Brighid moved through the studio, gesturing at different canvases. "This one is a spring in the Cairngorms that remembers the Ice Age. This one is a stream that remembers when salmon ran so thick you could cross on their backs. This one," she stopped before a dark, turbulent canvas. "This one is a river that's trying to forget what's been poured into it." Mira could feel the truth of each painting resonating with her water sense. Brighid had somehow captured not just the visual appearance of water, but its essence, its story, its spirit. "How do you do it? I listen, just like you do." Brighid picked up a brush, turning it over in her paint-stained fingers. "The singers showed me that water is a painter too. It paints landscapes, carves stone, creates its own art over millennia. I'm just trying to translate that into a language humans can understand." Over the next week, Mira sat for Brighid while the artist worked on her portrait. But it wasn't a traditional portrait. Brighid painted Mira as if she were made of water, transparent in places, with currents flowing through her body, springs bubbling in her chest where her heart should be, and in her eyes, the reflection of the lighthouse beam sweeping across dark waters. "This is how I see you," Brighid explained, "how the singers see all of us. We're not separate from water anymore. We're becoming it, or remembering that we always were it. Our bodies are just temporary vessels for the same water that's been cycling through this planet for billions of years." While Brighid painted, they talked. Or rather, Brighid talked, and Mira listened, absorbing 15 years of wisdom from someone who had walked this path longer. "The hardest thing," Brighid said one afternoon as rain drummed on the studio skylights, "is accepting that we can't save everything. I spent the first 5 years after my calling trying to protect every spring, document every pure source, convince everyone who would listen. I nearly destroyed myself." She paused, mixing a particular shade of blue-green that exactly matched the color of deep aquifer water. "Then an old woman in the village, she must have been 90, she told me something that changed everything. She said, 'A garden doesn't ask you to save every plant. It asks you to tend what you can reach, and trust that others are tending what they can reach.'" "The network," Mira said. "The network. We're gardeners, not saviors. We each tend our section, and together we preserve what can be preserved." Brighid's brush moved with absolute confidence across the canvas. "Marcus tends the ocean. You're learning to tend the springs. I tend the memory through art. Isla tends the science and the connections between us. There's a man in Peru who tends high-altitude glacial streams. A woman in Australia who guards underground aquifers in the outback. We're all part of the same garden." "But what if it's not enough? What if we save 100 springs and 10,000 are destroyed?" Brighid set down her brush and looked at Mira directly. "Then we've saved 100 springs. That's 100 more than would have been saved if we'd done nothing. You can't think about what you can't save, or you'll drown in grief. You have to focus on what you can save and trust that it matters, even if the whole system collapses, especially if the whole system collapses." Brighid returned to her painting. "Because when it does, and it might, there will need to be seeds of memory left, places where water still knows itself, sources that can teach the survivors how water is supposed to be. We're not just preserving springs, we're preserving knowledge for a future that might need to rebuild everything from scratch." The words settled into Mira like stones sinking to a riverbed. She had been thinking too small, focused only on the present crisis. But the singers were thinking in geological time, in spans that made human lifetimes look like single heartbeats. They weren't just trying to prevent a catastrophe. They were trying to ensure that if catastrophe came, the memory of what had been lost would survive. "Has anyone ever tried to bring all the guardians together?" Mira asked. "Once, about 7 years ago. Isla organized a gathering in Iceland. 15 of us came. It was powerful, having everyone in one place, feeling the collective strength of the network. But it was also dangerous. Dangerous how? Brighid was quiet for a moment, her brush pausing mid-stroke. When you put that much water sense in one place, it amplifies. We could feel everything, every poisoned stream on the planet, every dying aquifer, every choking ocean. It was overwhelming. 2 people had complete breakdowns and had to leave early. Another stopped speaking for 3 days. She resumed painting. We decided that the network works better distributed. We're stronger apart, each focusing on our own territory, than we are together drowning in collective grief. But you stay connected? Through Isla mostly. She's the web's center, the one who knows everyone and can make introductions when needed. And through the water itself. If you listen carefully, you can feel the other guardians. We're all connected through the same planetary circulation. Mira tried it, closing her eyes and reaching out with her water sense. At first, she felt only the immediate, the loch outside, the rain, the springs scattered through the highlands. But then, as she went deeper, she felt something else. Distant pulses, like far-off heartbeats. Marcus on his boat off Nova Scotia. Isla documenting a spring in Vermont. And others, fainter, scattered across the globe. A constellation of consciousness, all attuned to water, all working to preserve what remained. I feel them, she breathed. That's the real network, Brighid said softly. Not the phone calls and emails and meetings, but this, the deep connection through water itself. The singers gave us this so we'd never truly be alone, even when we're isolated in our own territories. The portrait was finished after a week. When Brighid turned the canvas to show her, Mira barely recognized herself. The woman in the painting was both more and less than human, transparent, luminous, clearly visible as a being made of water, temporarily shaped into human form. The lighthouse stood behind her, but its beam seemed to come from within her body, as if she had become the light itself. Is this how you see me? Mira asked. It's how you're becoming. All of us guardians, we're transforming, slowly over years, becoming more water than flesh, more memory than matter. It's why some of us don't survive. They can't hold the balance between human and elemental. They tip too far toward water and forget how to be solid. Brighid covered the canvas carefully. But you've got the lighthouse keeper's discipline. You know how to maintain light in darkness, how to keep burning without consuming yourself. I think you'll find the balance. That evening, Brighid took them to her most precious discovery, a spring high in the highlands that had been sacred to the ancient Picts, who had built a stone circle around it 2,000 years ago. The stones still stood, weathered but enduring, and the spring still flowed, clear and cold. This is why we do this, Brighid said as they sat within the stone circle, listening to the spring's music. This water has flowed for millennia. People have drunk from it, made offerings to it, recognized its sacredness. And it's still here, still pure, still remembering. If we protect it, it will still be here 1,000 years from now, still singing the same song. Mira knelt beside the spring and placed her hands in the water. Immediately, she felt its vast age, its deep memory. This water had witnessed the Romans, the Vikings, the Picts before either. It had quenched the thirst of people whose languages were now dead, whose gods were now forgotten. But the water remained, patient and eternal. I understand now, Mira said. We're not trying to save water. Water will survive long after humans are gone. We're trying to save humanity's relationship with water. We're trying to preserve the knowledge that water is sacred, that it deserves respect and reverence. not exploitation and poison. Now you've got it, Brighid said, smiling. The singers don't need us to save them. They need us to save ourselves. And maybe we can't save everyone, but we can save the knowledge, the memory, the relationship, so that if humanity survives, it might do better next time. They stayed at the spring until the stars came out, brilliant in the highland darkness. And as Mira looked up at the sky, she thought about water's journey, falling as rain, flowing through stone, emerging as springs, running to rivers, reaching the ocean, evaporating to clouds, falling again as rain. An endless cycle, indifferent to human timescales, patient beyond all human patience. The singers were part of that cycle. The guardians were part of that cycle. And if Mira did her work well, future generations would still have access to that cycle, would still be able to drink from springs that remembered the world before the poisoning. It was a modest goal compared to saving everything, but it was achievable, and achievement, however small, was better than despair. Before they left Scotland, Brighid gave Mira a gift, a small canvas showing a spring emerging from rocks, painted in luminous blues and greens that seemed to glow with their own light. "Hang this somewhere you'll see it every day," Brighid said. "When the grief gets too heavy, when you feel like giving up, look at it. Remember that beauty still exists, that purity still exists, that the work matters." "Thank you," Mira said, embracing the artist, "for the painting, for the wisdom, for showing me how to survive this calling." "You would have figured it out," Brighid said. "You've got the strength, but I'm glad I could help it along." They flew back across the Atlantic, Mira cradling the painting carefully. Isla worked on her laptop beside her, cataloging data, updating the network's maps, sending carefully worded emails to potential allies. "We're building something real," Isla said at one point, looking up from her screen. "When we started this, it was just me and a handful of isolated individuals who thought they might be going mad. Now we're an actual network. We have protocols, shared data, mutual support. We're stronger than we were. But is it enough? Enough for what? To stop climate change? To end water pollution? To reverse aquifer depletion?" Isla shook her head. "No, we can't do any of that. But that was never the mission. The mission is to preserve springs, knowledge, hope. And in that, we're succeeding." Mira looked out the window at the clouds below, thinking about all the water vapor they contained, all the rain waiting to fall, all the cycles continuing regardless of human interference. "I need to go home," she said suddenly. "Back to the lighthouse. I need to see my father." "Of course. We'll go tomorrow." But when they arrived back at Cressida Village the next day, something had changed. The lighthouse still stood. Its beam still swept the waters. But there was a tension in the village that Mira felt immediately. Her father met them at the door, his face grave. "There's been a development," he said. "A company wants to buy the land around the lighthouse. They're planning to drill for an aquifer they've detected beneath the property. They say it could provide water for 3 coastal towns." Mira felt ice crystallize in her stomach. "The aquifer beneath us, the one that feeds the village spring, the same. They've got government approval, they've got investors, and they've offered me a substantial sum to agree to the drilling on Lighthouse property." "You said no." "I said I needed to talk to you first." Theron looked at his daughter with an expression that was part pride, part sorrow. "This is your inheritance, Mira. The lighthouse, the land, the aquifer beneath it. The decision should be yours." Mira closed her eyes and reached down with her water sense. The aquifer was there, vast and old, its water filtered through millennia of stone, pure and cold and precious. If it were drilled, if it were pumped at industrial rates to supply 3 towns, it would be depleted in decades. The spring in the village would run dry. The water's memory would be fragmented, disturbed, ultimately lost. But if she refused, the company would find another source. Other aquifers would be drained. Other springs would die. She couldn't stop all of it. She could only protect what she could reach. "Tell them no," she said, opening her eyes. "The aquifer stays protected. The spring keeps flowing. This is the ground we defend." Her father nodded slowly. "I thought you'd say that. They won't be happy. I don't care." Mira looked at the lighthouse, its beam beginning to glow as evening approached. "I've spent my whole life tending a light to protect strangers from rocks they can't see. Now I'm tending a different light, protecting water they can't value properly. The principle is the same." "They'll fight us," Isla warned. "Companies like that don't give up easily when there's profit involved." "That we'll fight back, with lawyers, with science, with public pressure, whatever it takes." Mira felt something crystallizing inside her, not just commitment, but a fierce protective love for this particular spring, this particular aquifer, this piece of the water cycle that she could actually defend. She couldn't save everything, but she could save this. "Gather the network," she said to Isla. "Everyone who can help, lawyers, activists, scientists, journalists. We're going to make this aquifer famous. We're going to show the world why some water should never be commodified." Isla smiled grimly. "Now you're thinking like a guardian. First you learn to find the springs, then you learn to protect them. This is where the real work begins." That night, Mira climbed to the top of the lighthouse and stood beside the great lamp as it swept its beam across the water. Below, the village slept. Further below, the aquifer dreamed its slow dreams, its water older than human memory. The singers had called her to be a witness. But witnesses didn't stay silent. They testified. They defended. They fought for what they had seen. Mira was ready to fight. The Lighthouse Keeper's Daughter. Chapter 5. The Keeper of the Eternal Return. The battle for the aquifer took 8 months. 8 months of lawyers and environmental impact studies, of town meetings and media campaigns, of late nights poring over groundwater models and historical records. Isla coordinated a coalition of scientists who documented the aquifer's unique characteristics. Marcus rallied support from fishing communities who depended on the coastal springs the aquifer fed. Brighid created a series of paintings showing the aquifer's water, what it was now, what it would become if industrially exploited, and displayed them in galleries across the region. But the real turning point came when Mira testified at the state environmental hearing. She had prepared scientific arguments, data about recharge rates and sustainable yield, documentation of the springs that depended on the aquifer. But when she stood before the panel of bureaucrats and company representatives, with her father sitting in the audience and Isla beside her with folders full of evidence, she found herself speaking from somewhere deeper. "I've spent my life beside the ocean," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I've watched it in all its moods, calm and furious, generous and jealous, and I've learned that the ocean has a long memory. It remembers everything we pour into it, everything we take from it, everything we do to it. That memory is coming due." She saw some of the panel members exchange glances. Here comes another environmental extremist. But she continued, "The aquifer beneath the lighthouse is not just water. It's memory. It's water that has been filtered through stone for thousands of years. Water that has never known industrial contamination. Water that still remembers what water was before we learned to poison it. If you allow this drilling, you're not just extracting a resource, you're destroying a record. You're erasing part of the planet's own history." The company's lawyer stood. Miss Theron, with all due respect, water is water. This romanticism about memory and history doesn't change the fact that 3 towns need a water source, and this aquifer could provide it. Mira turned to him directly. Water is not just water. Ask anyone who's ever tasted the difference between spring water and tap water. Ask farmers why certain springs produce better crops. Ask the singers. She stopped, realizing she'd said too much. The singers? The lawyer seized on it. What singers? For a moment, Mira stood on a knife's edge. She could retreat, claim she misspoke, stick to scientific arguments. Or she could tell the truth. Not all of it, but enough. There are places in the ocean where the water still sings, she said quietly. Not metaphorically, actually sings. I've heard it. And there are places on land where water rises pure from the deep, and if you listen carefully enough, you can hear the same song. The aquifer beneath the lighthouse is one of those places. Destroy it, and you destroy something you don't even have the language to understand you've lost. The hearing room was silent. Then the panel chair, an older woman with sharp eyes, leaned forward. Miss Theron, are you saying you've had some kind of mystical experience with this aquifer? Mira met her gaze steadily. I'm saying that some things are too precious to quantify on a spreadsheet, too valuable to be measured in gallons per minute and profit margins. I'm saying that in a world where we've poisoned almost everything, the few pure sources that remain should be treated as sacred. Not because of mysticism, but because of basic respect for what sustains us. She sat down, her heart pounding, certain she had just destroyed their case by sounding like an irrational zealot. But then something unexpected happened. An elderly man in the audience stood, one of the village fishermen, someone Mira had known her entire life, but never spoken with about the singers or guardianship. I know what she's talking about, he said in a rough voice. My grandfather used to take me to the spring that feeds from that aquifer. He said it was blessed water, that it had power. I thought he was just old and superstitious. But after 50 years fishing these waters, I've learned that the old folks knew things we've forgotten. There are places where the water is different, better, stronger, and we should protect them, even if we can't explain why in scientific terms. Then another person stood, and another. People from the village, people from neighboring towns, even a few tourists who had visited the area. One by one, they testified to the spring's importance, not just as water sources, but as places that felt sacred, that seemed to heal, that connected them to something larger than themselves. The panel had expected a routine approval process. Instead, they found themselves confronting something they hadn't prepared for. A community united around the protection of water, not for practical reasons alone, but for spiritual ones. The decision took another month. When it finally came, it was narrow, a 4-3 vote against the drilling permit. The aquifer would remain protected, at least for now. Mira stood on the beach the day the decision was announced, watching the waves roll in, feeling the aquifer pulse beneath her feet like a second heartbeat. One spring saved, one aquifer protected, one small victory in an impossibly large struggle. But it was enough. It had to be enough. Isla found her there an hour later, bringing news that would change everything. There's someone you need to meet, Isla said. She's come all the way from New Zealand. She says the singers called her 30 years ago. She's the oldest active guardian I've found, and she wants to talk to you specifically. Her name was Aroha, and she was Maori, in her 70s, with silver hair and eyes that held the same depth Mira had seen in Marcus and Brighid. They met in the lighthouse's watchroom, with Mira's father making tea and then discreetly leaving them alone. You won your battle, Aroha said, her accent musical. That's good, but you need to understand, it's only the first of many. I know. Do you? Aroha's gaze was piercing. The singers called me in 1995. I've been a guardian for 3 decades. I've seen other guardians come and go, seen some triumph and some break. And I've learned something important. We're not trying to win the war. We're trying to maintain the possibility of winning it. I don't understand the difference. Winning the war would mean reversing climate change, cleaning all the world's water, restoring every damaged ecosystem. That's not going to happen. Not in our lifetimes. Maybe not ever. But maintaining the possibility of winning it, that we can do. We can keep pure sources alive. We can preserve the knowledge of how water should be. We can inspire people to remember the sacred relationship humans once had with water, so that when humanity finally decides to stop poisoning itself, there will still be seeds to plant, still be memory to guide the restoration. Aroha moved to the window, looking out at the ocean. My people have a concept, Kaitsiakitanga. It means guardianship, but deeper than that. It means understanding that we're not owners of the natural world, but caretakers, that we're part of a long line, ancestors behind us, descendants ahead of us, and our job is to receive what the ancestors preserved and pass it on to the descendants in at least as good condition as we received it. But we didn't receive it in good condition, Mira said. Previous generations poisoned it. Then we pass it on in better condition than we received it. Even if that just means stopping it from getting worse. Even if it just means preserving a few pure sources in a world of pollution. Aroha turned back to her. That's Kaitiakitanga. Not perfectionism, not salvation, just faithful guardianship of what we can reach. They talked for hours, Aroha sharing 3 decades of hard-won wisdom. She told stories of springs she'd protected, battles she'd fought, guardians she'd watched burn out or endure. And she told Mira something that would haunt her for years to come. The singers are dying, Aroha said quietly. Not all of them, but many. The ocean is changing too fast, warming, acidifying, filling with plastic. The singers are beings of pure water, and when water is poisoned, they suffer. That's why they're calling more guardians now than ever before. They're running out of time. Mira felt cold dread wash through her. How long do they have? I don't know. Neither do they. But they're racing against something, trying to call enough guardians, preserve enough springs, save enough memory before the ocean changes so much they can no longer survive in it. What happens if they die? If there are no more singers? Aroha was quiet for a long moment. Then we become the singers. We carry the memory. We sing the song of water to anyone who will listen. That's why they're calling us. Not just to preserve springs, but to preserve the knowledge, so that even if they vanish, what they know won't be lost. That night, Mira couldn't sleep. She climbed to the lighthouse top and stood in the darkness. Her father had extinguished the beam for maintenance. Without the light, the night was absolutely black, the stars brilliant overhead, the ocean invisible except for the sound of waves. She thought about all the guardians scattered across the world, each one protecting their piece of the puzzle, each one carrying their part of the memory. She thought about the singers, those ancient beings of living water, slowly dying as humanity poisoned their home. She thought about her grandfather, who had walked this path before her and left maps she was still following. She thought about future guardians, people not yet born who would inherit the work she was doing now, and she understood something profound. This was not a mission that could be completed. It was a commitment that had to be continuously renewed, generation after generation, for as long as water flowed and humans needed it. She was not trying to solve the water crisis. She was trying to be faithful to the calling, to tend her section of the garden, to pass on more than she had received. It was both a relief and a burden. The relief of not having to save everything, the burden of having to remain committed even when success seemed impossible. As dawn approached, Mira heard singing, not from the ocean this time, but from the aquifer beneath her feet, from the spring in the village, from the network of pure sources she and the other guardians were protecting. They were singing a song of endurance, of patience, of faith that water would outlast the poisoning and remember itself once more. She descended the lighthouse stairs and found her father waiting at the bottom with coffee and fresh bread. "You were up there all night," he said. "I needed to think." "And what did you conclude?" Mira accepted the coffee gratefully, warming her hands on the mug. "That I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing this, finding springs, protecting aquifers, building the network of guardians. It's not glamorous. It won't make me famous or rich. I'll probably die having protected a tiny fraction of what needs protecting. But it's my work, my calling, and I'm going to be faithful to it." Her father smiled, pride and sadness mixing in his expression. "Your mother would be proud. Hell, I'm proud. You've become what this place always needed. Not just someone who tends the light, but someone who tends the living waters beneath it. Will you keep the lighthouse until I can't climb the stairs anymore? Then maybe you'll find someone else to tend it, someone who understands what we understand, that keeping the light burning and keeping the water pure are really the same work. Both are about preserving life in the face of darkness." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sunrise paint the ocean in shades of gold and rose. Somewhere out there, the singers were diving into the deep, singing their ancient songs, calling more guardians to the work. Somewhere, other guardians were waking up to their own battles, their own springs to protect, their own piece of the infinite work. And Mira was part of that network now, not just connected to it, but woven into it, as essential as any other thread. She could feel them all, faintly, through the water that connected everything. Marcus checking his ocean charts, Brighid mixing paints in her Scottish studio, Aroha walking the beaches of New Zealand, and dozens more, each doing their part. The work would never be finished, but it would continue. In the days that followed, Mira began developing a new practice. Every morning, before anything else, she would walk to the spring in the village, the one fed by the aquifer she had fought to protect. She would cup her hands in its water and drink, tasting its purity, feeling its memory, reconnecting with the reason for all the struggle. Then she would speak a simple commitment, words that became her daily prayer. "I will tend what I can reach. I will preserve what I can preserve. I will remember what must not be forgotten, and I will pass on more than I received." It was enough. It had to be enough. And slowly, it became enough. The network grew. More guardians were called. More springs were found and protected. The battle for the lighthouse aquifer had shown that communities could be mobilized around water protection if the case was made, not just scientifically, but spiritually. Other guardians began using similar approaches, framing conservation not just as environmental necessity, but as sacred duty. Laws began to change, slowly, as the accumulated pressure of hundreds of local battles added up to regional and then national policy shifts. Not enough to solve everything, but enough to make a difference. And individual by individual, person by person, the message spread. Water is sacred. Water remembers. Water deserves protection, not because of its utility, but because of its intrinsic value. its role as the matrix of all life, its status as the planet's living memory. Mira's own reputation grew within the network. She became known as someone who could find springs with uncanny accuracy, who could testify compellingly at hearings, who could balance the grief of loss with the joy of preservation. Young guardians sought her out for mentorship. Isla used her as a case study in sustainable guardianship, but Mira never forgot the lessons of those early months. From Marcus's near despair, from Brighid's art of processing grief, from Aroha's long view of generational work. She celebrated small victories. She took time to simply sit with pure water and feel gratitude. She maintained connections with other guardians, sharing the emotional weight so no one had to carry it alone. And every night, she climbed the lighthouse stairs and lit the great lamp, sending its beam out across the waters. Two kinds of light: the lighthouse beam warning ships away from rocks, and her own growing luminescence as a guardian, warning humanity away from the rocks of its own making. 10 years passed. On the anniversary of her first encounter with the singers, Mira returned to the beach where she had walked into the ocean and been transformed. She was 36 now, with silver beginning to thread through her hair, her hands permanently stained, not with paint like Brighid's, but with the subtle blue-green patina that all the long-term guardians developed, as if their skin were slowly turning to water. She waded into the waves, and immediately the singers came. There were fewer than before, she could sense it. The ocean was hotter, more acidic, more polluted. The singers were struggling, but they came, rising from the depths with their haunting song. The eldest singer, the same one who had first pulled her under, floated before her in the shallow water. "Daughter of the light," it sang, "you have been faithful to the calling. I have tried. You have done more than try. You have preserved memory. You have awakened others. You have shown that humans can still remember the sacred relationship with water." The singer's large eyes reflected the setting sun. "We are fading. You know this. I know. I'm sorry." "Do not be sorry. All things fade. Even the ocean will one day evaporate as the sun expands. But memory can outlast matter if it is carefully tended." The singer reached out and placed a webbed hand over Mira's heart. "We give you the final gift, the deepest memory, the song of water itself." And suddenly Mira was flooded with images, sensations, knowledge that spanned billions of years. She saw water forming in the cold reaches of space, condensing from stellar gases. She saw it raining down on young Earth, filling the first oceans. She saw it cycling through the planet, ocean to cloud, to rain, to river, to ocean, again and again, carrying minerals, shaping landscapes, bringing life. She saw the first cells forming in tidal pools, the first fish in ancient seas, the first amphibians crawling onto land, carrying ocean water in their bodies. The evolution of life itself, all of it dependent on water, all of it shaped by water's patient sculpting over eons. And she saw the future, not one future, but many possibilities branching like tributaries. In some, humanity woke up and stopped the poisoning, learned to live in harmony with water again. In others, humanity failed, and the planet healed itself slowly over millennia, water eventually returning to its pure state long after humans were gone. But in all futures, water endured. Changed perhaps, but enduring. Memory preserved, even if the beings who remembered it changed form. The vision faded, and Mira found herself kneeling in the shallows, tears streaming down her face, her entire body singing with the song she had been given. "Teach this," the singer said, "to all who will listen, so that even when we are gone, the song continues. "I will," Mira promised. "I will sing it until my last breath, and I'll teach others to sing it after I'm gone." The singers circled her once, their voices harmonizing in a sound that was both greeting and farewell. Then they dove back into the deep, and Mira knew with certainty she would never see them again. But she could still hear their song. It was written into her cells now, into her water, into the very structure of her being, and she would pass it on. She walked back up the beach to where Isla waited, having witnessed everything from a distance. "They're gone," Mira said. "I know, I felt it." Isla's face was wet with tears. "What do we do now?" "We keep going. We become what they were, carriers of the memory, singers of the song. We find springs, protect aquifers, teach others to hear what water is saying. We do it not because the singers are here to guide us, but because it's our inheritance and our duty." They walked back to the lighthouse together, two guardians among many, carrying forward an ancient mission that would outlast them both. That night, Mira gathered what had become her extended family. Her father, now 70, but still climbing the lighthouse stairs. Isla, whose hair had gone gray, but whose commitment had never wavered. Marcus, who had traveled down from Nova Scotia. Brighid, who had flown over from Scotland. Aroha, joining via video call from New Zealand. And a dozen younger guardians whom Mira had mentored over the years. She told them about the singer's farewell, about the final gift of the song, and then she began to teach it. Not in words, the song was beyond words, but in gesture, in tone, in a kind of communion through water itself. She taught them to feel the song in their bodies, to sense it in every spring and river and raindrop, to understand that they were part of an ancient story that began before humans and would continue long after. By the end of the night, everyone present could feel it. The deep rhythm of water cycling through the planet, the patient memory held in every molecule, the enduring presence of something far greater and older than human civilization. "This is what we preserve," Mira said, her voice steady and clear. "Not just springs, not just water, but the song itself, the memory of connection, of cycle, of belonging to something vast and ancient. As long as we carry this song and teach it to others, the singers haven't truly left us. They've become part of us." The younger guardians listened with reverence, and Mira could see understanding dawn on their faces. This wasn't just about environmental conservation. It was about maintaining humanity's connection to the sacred, about remembering that we are not separate from nature, but expressions of it, temporary arrangements of water and minerals that would one day return to the cycle. Over the following years, Mira developed a curriculum for training new guardians. It wasn't formal, no certifications, no official organization that could be corrupted or co-opted. Instead, it was apprenticeship, mentorship, knowledge passed person to person in the ancient way. She taught them first to listen, to sit beside water for hours, days even, until they could hear beyond the surface sounds to the deeper currents of memory flowing beneath. She taught them the practical skills, how to identify pure springs, how to test water quality without instruments, how to read landscape and geology to predict where aquifers lay hidden. But most importantly, she taught them how to carry the weight without breaking. She took them to Selkie Falls and other beautiful places, teaching them to balance grief with joy. She connected them with other guardians so they would never feel alone. She helped them develop their own practices for processing the sorrow of witnessing environmental destruction. "The work will break you if you let it," she told each new guardian. "You have to find ways to stay whole. For some, it's art. For others, it's science or activism, or simply tending a single spring with perfect devotion. Find what keeps you human while you're learning to become water." The lighthouse became a pilgrimage site of sorts for the guardians. They would come for a few days or weeks, learning from Mira, connecting with the protected aquifer, feeling the song resonate through the ancient water beneath the lighthouse. Her father, now in his 80s, welcomed them all with quiet grace, recognizing in each one the same calling his daughter had answered. The legal battle for the aquifer had established an important precedent. Other communities began using similar arguments, that some water sources were too precious, too sacred, too integral to local ecosystems to be commercially exploited. The guardians provided expert testimony, scientific data, and compelling narratives that swayed public opinion. They didn't win every battle, far from it. Aquifers were still depleted, springs still went dry, rivers still choked on pollution. But they won enough battles to matter, and each victory inspired others. 20 years after her calling, Mira stood once again on the beach where she had first walked into the ocean. She was 46 now, her hair almost entirely silver, her skin carrying that blue-green patina that marked all the elder guardians. She could feel water with a sensitivity that would have seemed impossible to her younger self. Not just nearby sources, but the entire hydrological cycle, the vast global circulation of water through ocean, atmosphere, land, and life. The network had grown beyond anything she had imagined. There were now over 300 known guardians worldwide, with probably twice that many who worked quietly without connecting to the larger network. They had protected thousands of springs, influenced water policy in dozens of countries, and most importantly, had kept the memory alive. The song that the singers had given her had been passed to every guardian, who in turn taught it to others. Not just other guardians, but anyone who would listen. Musicians had incorporated it into their compositions. Poets had tried to capture it in verse. Scientists had studied the phenomenon, documenting how prolonged exposure to pure springs seemed to affect consciousness, opening people to a deeper awareness of water. Some called it mysticism, others called it emergent ecology. The recognition that water was not just H2O, but a complex, information-carrying medium that connected all life. It didn't matter what they called it. What mattered was that people were beginning to remember. Mira waded into the surf, feeling the cold Atlantic embrace her legs. She no longer feared the water, no longer felt the human panic of potential drowning. She and water had become kin, old friends, partners in the work of preservation. She reached out with her water sense, feeling not for the singers, she knew they were gone, but for the echo of what they had been. And there, in the deep places where sunlight never reached, she felt something. Not the singers themselves, but their memory held in the water, their song continuing even though they no longer sang it. Water remembered. It always remembered. A voice called her name, and she turned to see a young woman standing on the beach, maybe 22, with dark eyes that held that particular depth that marked someone who had been called. She had arrived that morning, traveling from Arizona where she tended desert springs, drawn by something she couldn't name, to meet the lighthouse keeper who had become a legend among the guardians. Mira waded back to shore and embraced her. "Welcome, you've come a long way." "I had to meet you," the young woman said. Her name was Sophia. "Everyone talks about you. The first one called after the singers returned, the one who fought and won, the one who learned the song." "I'm not special," Mira said gently. "I was just in the right place at the right time, with the right preparation. Lighthouse keepers are used to lonely vigils and patient tending. The singers knew that about me. But you've trained so many of us. You've protected so much, and you'll train many more. You'll protect even more. That's how this works. Each generation receives from the one before and passes to the one after, adding their own contributions, their own preserved springs, their own wisdom. Mira gestured back toward the lighthouse. Come, I'll show you the aquifer that started it all, and I'll teach you the song if you're ready to carry it. They walked up the beach together, the older guardian and the younger, and Mira felt the continuity of the work stretching forward into time. She wouldn't live forever. Her body was already showing signs of the transformation that Brighid had warned about, becoming more water than flesh, more memory than matter. But the work would continue. The song would continue. That evening, Sophia joined Mira at the top of the lighthouse as she lit the great lamp. The ritual had become sacred to Mira. The climb, the careful preparation of the mechanism, the moment when flame met wick and light blazed out across the water. Why do you still do this? Sophia asked. The lighthouse has automated systems now. You don't need to light it manually. No, Mira agreed, watching the beam begin its sweep. But I want to. This light and the work of the guardians, they're the same thing. Both are about maintaining something precious in the face of darkness. Both require daily commitment, patient tending, faith that the work matters, even when you can't see everyone it helps. She turned to Sophia, the young woman's face illuminated by the lamp's glow. The singers called me here, to this lighthouse, because I already knew how to do this work. I just had to learn to apply it to a different kind of light. And now I'm teaching you, so you can tend your own lights in the desert, protecting your springs the way I protect mine. What happens when you can't climb the stairs anymore? Sophia asked quietly. Mira had been thinking about this question for years. Then someone else will climb them. Maybe you. Maybe another guardian who needs a place to anchor their work. The lighthouse will endure, and so will the aquifer beneath it. And so will the work of remembering what water truly is. They stayed up there until dawn, Mira teaching Sophia the song, not through words, but through shared silence, through sitting together beside the lamp, while water cycled through their bodies, through the air as humidity, through the ground beneath them as the vast aquifer slowly circulated. By sunrise, Sophia could feel it too, the deep rhythm, the ancient memory, the song that connected all water everywhere. Tears ran down her face, and Mira remembered her own tears on the beach 20 years ago, when the singers had first shown her the truth. It's overwhelming, Sophia whispered. It is, but you can carry it. You're stronger than you know. Mira placed a hand on the young woman's shoulder. And you're not alone. You have the whole network. You have the song. You have the water itself, which will sustain you if you remember to listen to it. In the months that followed, Mira noticed the transformation accelerating. Her body was becoming translucent in places, her skin taking on the quality of water flowing over stone. She could feel her consciousness expanding, spreading out through the hydrological cycle, less concentrated in her physical form. Brighid had experienced this too in her final years. Marcus had written about it. It was the ultimate transformation, the guardian becoming indistinguishable from what they guarded, the boundary between human and water dissolving completely. Isla visited frequently, documenting everything with scientific precision, but also profound love. They had been partners in this work for over 20 years, and the bond between them was deeper than friendship. It was the recognition of two people who had devoted their lives to the same calling. "You're fading," Isla said one afternoon as they sat by the village spring. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. "I'm transforming," Mira corrected, "becoming what I was always meant to be, what we all become if we're faithful to the calling long enough." "Does it hurt?" "No, it feels like coming home, like finally admitting what I've known since the singers first pulled me under, that I was never entirely human to begin with. None of us are. We're water temporarily organized into human form, walking around thinking we're separate from the rain and rivers, when really we're just part of the same endless cycle. Will you disappear entirely? Mira considered this. I don't think so. I think I'll become like the singers, part of the water itself, present in the springs I've protected, available to those who know how to listen. Not gone, just distributed, diffused, returned to the source. Her father died peacefully in his sleep at 88, and they buried him on the hillside overlooking the lighthouse he had tended for over 60 years. At the funeral, dozens of guardians came to pay respects, not just to Theron, but to the man who had supported his daughter's impossible calling, who had kept the lighthouse burning while she traveled the world protecting springs, who had welcomed every guardian who came seeking wisdom. Mira stood by his grave and felt the rain beginning to fall. Soft, gentle, the kind of rain that nurtures rather than destroys. She reached up and let it fall on her face, feeling each drop as an individual blessing, each one carrying its own story of where it had been, what it had touched, what it remembered. Thank you, she whispered to her father, to the rain, to the singers long gone, to the water that connected everything. Thank you for teaching me to tend the light. Thank you for showing me that faithfulness matters more than success. Thank you for preparing me for this calling before I even knew what it would be. The rain intensified, and Mira felt herself dissolving into it, her boundaries becoming permeable. She was crying, and her tears were joining the rain, which was joining the groundwater, which was feeding the aquifer, which was sustaining the spring, which was flowing to the ocean. She was part of it all, had always been part of it all, was finally admitting the truth of that participation. Sophia found her there an hour later, kneeling by the grave, so translucent she was barely visible in the rain. Mira? Sophia's voice was frightened. Are you okay? I'm perfect, Mira said, and meant it. I'm finally understanding what the singers were trying to tell me all along. We don't protect water from outside it. We protect it by remembering we are it, by living that truth so completely that there's no separation between guardian and guarded. She stood, took Sophia's hand. The lighthouse is yours now. The aquifer, the spring, the work here. You'll tend it as my father tended it, as I tended it. And when your time comes, you'll pass it to someone else. That's how it continues, each generation receiving and giving, carrying forward the song. Where will you go? Mira smiled. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying right here, in the spring, in the aquifer, in the rain. I'm just letting go of this particular shape, this temporary condensation of water into human form. But I'll still be here, and you'll still be able to find me if you listen carefully enough. The transformation completed over the following weeks. Mira spent her days sitting by the spring, becoming more transparent with each passing hour. Guardians came to visit, to receive final teachings, to say goodbye. But Mira kept insisting it wasn't goodbye. It was a change of form, not an ending. Brighid arrived from Scotland, herself becoming translucent. Her paintings now so luminous, they seemed to be made of living water rather than pigment. We're the first generation, Brighid said as they sat together by the spring. The first ones called after the singers returned, the first to live long enough to complete the transformation. Others will follow. Marcus is already beginning to fade into the ocean. Aroha is dissolving into the New Zealand springs. We're becoming what we were meant to become. Do you think we'll still be able to communicate after? I think we already do, through the water. We'll just do it more completely once we're not constrained by these bodies. Brighid took Mira's hand, both of them barely solid now, more like water holding the memory of hands than actual flesh. We'll be the new singers, the ones who call the next generation, who pass on the song, who guard the springs from within the water itself. That's why they chose us, Mira realized. Not just to protect springs during our lifetimes, but to become guardians that would endure beyond human lifespan. To ensure that even if humanity completely forgets, there will always be voices in the water, calling them back to remembrance. On the spring equinox, 50 years to the day after the singers had first called her, Mira walked into the village spring and didn't come back out. Sophia watched from the bank, along with Isla and dozens of other guardians who had come for what they knew would be the final transformation. They saw Mira wade into the center of the pool, saw her turn back and smile, radiant, joyful, finally free. "Remember," Mira called out. "Remember the song. Remember that water is sacred. Remember that you are not separate from it. Remember and teach others to remember, and the work will never end." Then she dissolved. There was no other word for it. Her form lost coherence, becoming water indistinguishable from the spring water around her. For a moment, the entire pool glowed with soft blue-green light, the same bioluminescence the singers had carried. Then the light faded, and there was only the spring, flowing as it had always flowed, clear and cold and pure. But it was different now. Everyone present could feel it. The spring wasn't just water anymore. It was water that carried consciousness, memory, intention. Mira was still there, just no longer confined to a single body. She had become the spring itself, and through it, part of the entire aquifer, and through that, part of the global water cycle. Sophia knelt by the edge and placed her hand in the water. Immediately, she felt Mira's presence, not as a ghost or spirit, but as an essential quality of the water itself, as natural and undeniable as its coldness or clarity. "Continue the work," the water seemed to whisper. "Protect what you can reach. Teach others to listen. Keep the song alive. I'm here if you need me. We all are. All the guardians who have dissolved back into water. All the singers who gave us this calling. We're part of the cycle now. Forever." "I will," Sophia promised. "We all will." And they did. The network continued to grow, generation after generation. New guardians were called, sometimes by dreams, sometimes by inexplicable compulsions to visit certain springs, sometimes by voices they heard in rainfall that sounded almost human. They would find their way to the lighthouse, or to one of the other sacred sites the original guardians had protected, and there they would learn the song. They would discover that they weren't alone, that others had walked this path before, and transformed into something more than human, something essential. The lighthouse still stood. Its beam still swept the waters every night. The aquifer beneath it still flowed pure, protected by Sophia and those who came after her. And if you knew how to listen, if you sat very still beside the spring and opened yourself to what the water was saying, you could hear them. Mira, Brighid, Marcus, Aroha, all the guardians who had completed the transformation. They sang in the springs, in the rain, in the rivers and oceans. They sang the song the original singers had given them, the memory of what water truly was, the promise that even in the darkest times, purity could be preserved and passed forward. Humanity's relationship with water did eventually change, though it took another century of crisis to force the transformation. As aquifers failed and rivers dried up, as climate chaos intensified and clean water became the world's most precious resource, people finally began to listen to what the guardians had been saying all along. Water was sacred. Water was alive. Water remembered, and humanity's survival depended on remembering. How to live in right relationship with it. The springs the guardians had protected became the seeds of restoration. Engineers and hydrologists studied them, learning how natural systems filtered and purified water. Communities formed around them, organizing their lives according to the rhythms of the watershed rather than the demands of industry. Children were taught from earliest age to listen to water, to read its stories, to understand their place within the great cycle. And slowly, slower than anyone wanted, but faster than seemed possible, the poisoning stopped. Regulations changed, industries transformed. New technologies emerged that worked with water's natural processes rather than against them. The rivers began to heal. The aquifers slowly refilled. The ocean's temperature stabilized and then began, gradually, to cool. It wasn't paradise. The damage done couldn't be completely undone, and the world that emerged was different from the one that had been. But it was a world where water was honored, where springs were protected, where the song was taught to every child. And in that world, if you visited the lighthouse on the Atlantic coast, if you climbed the 217 iron steps to the top, if you stood beside the great lamp as it blazed out across the water, you might feel something, a presence, a consciousness, the accumulated wisdom of all the guardians who had given themselves to this work, who had dissolved into water so that water would never again be forgotten. The lighthouse keeper on duty, there was always a lighthouse keeper, part of an unbroken tradition stretching back centuries, would smile and tell you about Mira, the woman who had transformed the lighthouse from a beacon warning against rocks into a beacon calling humanity back to relationship with water. And if you asked very politely, if you had the right kind of heart, they might take you down to the spring and teach you how to listen, how to hear the song that the water was always singing, how to recognize that you were not separate from the rain and rivers, but part of them, water temporarily organized into human form, destined to return one day to the cycle. That was Mira's true legacy. Not the springs she had protected or the battles she had won, but the remembering she had made possible. The remembering that humans and water were kin, that the planet's life and humanity's life were inseparable, that the work of each generation was to receive gratefully from the ancestors and give generously to the descendants. The song continued, the water cycled, the guardians dissolved and reformed in an endless rhythm as old as earth itself. And somewhere in the deep, in the springs and aquifers and oceans, in the rain that fell and the rivers that flowed, Mira was still there, still teaching, still protecting, still singing the song that the original singers had given her half a century ago. Water remembered everything. That was its gift and its curse. And now, because of Mira and all the guardians who had followed her calling, humanity remembered too. The lighthouse beam swept across the water, constant and faithful, just as it had for over 200 years. Below, the aquifer dreamed its slow dreams. Above, the stars wheeled through their ancient patterns. And in between, the work continued. The endless, essential, sacred work of tending the light and protecting the water and keeping alive the memory of what connected everything. It was enough. It had always been enough. It would always be enough. The end of the lighthouse keeper's daughter.